Hi, good morning, everyone. Eu vou começar falando português, então. Hoje a gente começa aqui com uma mesa internacional. Quero dar as boas-vindas a todo mundo que está assistindo. Os nossos participantes de hoje, eles não falam português, então a gente vai estar mediando a mesa em inglês mesmo. Espero que seja proveitosa para todos. A gente já, só para vocês já saberem, nós já acertamos aqui a ordem de participação. A Kierra vai ser a primeira a falar e depois o Alberto vai falar sobre o trabalho dele. Eles vão se apresentar quando começarem, vão falar o título do que eles vão apresentar aqui. E a gente quer dar as boas-vindas a vocês, mais uma vez agradecer o pessoal do canal que está apoiando a gente, que está transmitindo a gente ao vivo aqui, o canal Agenciamentos Contemporâneos. Então, lembrar de falar para vocês seguirem o canal, curtirem os vídeos. E é isso, começamos mais um dia de trabalhos. So, I would like to welcome everyone on behalf of the organizing committee of the third meeting of post-graduation studies in philosophy at Unifesp. I would like to open the meeting by welcoming all of you who are present here, as well as our colleagues who will soon present their works. The order of the presentations has already been defined by the participants. So the first one will be Kierra. Kierra, please, it's your time now. You can present yourself.
Thank you, Monize, and thank you all, and thank you for organizing this event. I've seen the fancy video you have just before, and I like it very, very much. I'm few students in. Sorry, I'm just trying to present my slide.
Okay, I will put it for you.
Okay, thank you. I'm an MPhil student from the University of St. Andrews, and I'm originally from China. Today, my topic is concepts as skills, but it's only a small part of my MPhil dissertation, which is about whole picture of the inactive approach to perception. And this part mainly focus on how do we use concepts in perception. So today my talk will be constituted by mainly two parts. Firstly, I will introduce a little bit about what is the inactive approach to perception. And then I will focus more on the use of concepts in perception, and namely, why should we think that concepts are used as skills in perception, and how do we understand this proposal? So firstly, it's about the idea of inactivism. Basically, it's a thought about to emphasize that cognition or other mental states, or like how do we think, how do we perceive, etc. All of these things should be a sort of dynamic interaction of the organism and the environment, namely the interaction between the perceivers and the environments, or the thinkers and their environments. So, but my work mainly considers the inactive approach to perception that is proposed by Alva Noe. And his main idea would be that perceptual presence is achieved by us through efforts and skills. How should we understand perceptual presence? Easy way to think of this would be that perceptual presence is the way that things, objects are made to shown up for us. So it's mainly about how are they presented to us, and this makes it possible for us to see it, or for us to touch it, to smell it, etc. And how can we achieve this kind of perceptual presence? Basically, we have access to things by having mastery of sensory motor contingencies and navigating them. You guys must have this question, like, what are sensory motor contingencies? So this sort of sensory motor contingencies are basically originally proposed by Noe and his colleague, O'Regan. They proposed that this sort of contingencies are the occurrences of certain sensory changes or certain things that you can obtain sensorily in different environments. So what composed those different environments, we mainly consider the sensory and motor conditions in this sort of environments. Specifically speaking, it's about the features of the perceiver sensory organs. For example, what is the structure of our eyeballs or visual system? What is the structure of our system to smell, to hear, etc. And also, how do we make bodily movements to have different perspectives to observe objects, as well as those movements that can be made by different objects. For example, vehicles can be driven, and if you see a vehicle which is driven, you can see that it's moving, and you can observe them, given that they're moving. If I see a Tesla car, I can see its tail and its front. If it's like driven from this side to this side, I can observe it from different sides and different perspectives. So to describe a certain sensory motor contingency, we can use an expression in the form of if and then. It's basically like that. If I turn my head and focus, concentrate my mobile phone, then my mobile phone would be shown up for me, and I can see it. So in the view that's about sensory motor contingencies that is proposed by Evan Noe and Kevin O'Regan is quite radical, that they mainly considered about bodily movements. So they basically are proposing that bodily movements are constituents of our perceptual experience, of the way that we make objects to be present to us. However, this will be quite a strict condition. People may ask that, well, sometimes I do not move my head or raise my hands or something like that, but I can still perceive different things. So later on, Evan Noe just changed his version a little bit. He turns to say that, well, capacities for actions are constituents for having the perceptual presence. So you do not really need to make those bodily movements, but you should have to understand that what kinds of body movements you can do, and this can help you to perceive an object. For example, if I see a tomato, I can see its front, but I still perceive it as a voluminous object. I do not perceive it as a piece of paper which is formed in a shape of tomato, because I know that I can turn around for it, and I can see its back, and I can perceive that it's a voluminous object. I'm not very satisfied with Noe's proposal that's only capacities for acts is necessary for us to have perceptual presence. But I think that mental actions should be also considered in this scheme. However, I will skip it here because, yeah, I will move to next page. So basically, the inactive approach to perception can be understood as a direct realist approach. When you master the sense remote contingencies, you get direct contact to things, and you can grasp its being and existence there. So some people may think that it's also a relational view of perception. It's about to have a sense remote relationship between perceiver and those things that are perceived. I think that's the main point here we should grasp, is that the inactivists would be against the idea to understand perception as some sort of pictorial processing or something like that. For example, we should not take perception like something that's we take a snapshot of the world or we take photos of the world. It's perception is something like which is different from this sense. We have perceptual activity as an ongoing process, and it's what we do. We do not wait there and waiting for some sort of photos to tell us what is the world like. So based on this picture of perception, Noe argues that concepts, when we use concepts in perception, they are skills for taking hold of what there is. So concepts should not be, Noe argues that concepts should not be considered as categories, sets, prototypes, or Phrygian senses, etc. Because he thinks that all these things are something of a pro-representational sort about concepts as well as perception. And so instead, he proposed that concepts should be something that you pick things up in the environment where they are. So it's something like calipers rather than labels. You do not slap concepts on different things. Alternatively, you just pick them up from their environments with your concepts. And he thinks that in this way, concepts are used as a sort of skills. Well, Noe's view, especially his critics on, for example, Phrygian senses and sets prototypes could be flawed in the case that people may have controversies view about whether Phrygian senses would be a pro-representational view or not. But still, his view have some merits in that. So how do we understand this proposal, and what kinds of takeaways can we have by appreciating this view and developing it? Firstly, I think that it alarms us not to take concepts as names or signs. So concepts should be distinguished from names and signs, which are used to about making judgments about things. So we do not making judgments about whether a mobile phone should be categorized as a mobile phone, or whether something should be defined as in a group of things which is under certain concepts. we don't do that in perception when we use concepts. We do not see a pen and like just name it as a pen, or like categorize it with other pens in the category of pens in perception. We do more about objects when we use concepts in perception. The point is that the nature of concepts, and as well as our use of them, is partly determined by the nature of things that we grasp, and as well as the activity that we do to grasp the sense. So what are the important nature of things that we should have to consider about? This kind of nature is that things, when they exist in the world or in their environment, they will be changeable, and they can be dynamic, they can be movable. All of this sort of things determines that our perception about them cannot be achieved or like finished at a single moment. We have to pay attention to the possibility that what we perceive at this moment can change, or can have changes about their qualities or their physical positions, etc., etc. I do not mean that there will definitely be significant changes, but there will always be minor changes. Also, when there will be the possibility of significant changes, so we have to pay attention to this sort of changes, and all this kind of things brings up the fragility of the perceptual presence, which means that when things are shown up for us, they are not infinite, and they are not something that's always stable or unchangeable. They can be like left away or omitted if we do not pay enough attention to them, or we do not pay enough efforts to grasp them. In this case, we have to always take our skills, including concepts, to have a hold of things that are there, which can enable us to perceive them. So concepts will be the nature of the way that we use of concepts could be determined by this dynamic activity we do to perceive them, to perceive objects as well as dynamic objects. The use of concepts should be continuous and extensible. Okay, I will finish much soon. And when I say that the use of concepts is extensible, this would be different from merely linkable. For example, we do not categorize a pen at this moment, and then when I left it away and I turn back to this very same pen, I would name it again by a concept of pen. I do not do that. It's the use of the concept pen, or the use of concepts are extensible. It would like be always be there. And when I have the concept of pen, I can enact the certain contingency that this pen is presented to me as a pen at this moment, and I can turn away for some minutes, and in this moment, the contingency that this pen is there will be less enacted because I do not pay that much attention to it. But it would still be somehow enacted because I still hold the concept of pen. I still have the skill to enact it. And when I turn back to it, I can highlight this pen with the skill of the concept of pen a little bit more. And then it will be, again, presented to us, to me, better and clearer, etc. So a tentative explain of the way that we use concepts as skills, I think, would be that we use concepts to enact certain perceptual contingencies, which includes sense remote contingencies. And in this way, we pick up the things from, well, they are like, mainly we do not like pick it, or we do not need to pick it up by my like grasp with my hands every time, but I can pick them up, distinguish it from their environments with my concepts that I understand, which I can use. So this picking up and this hold, I have them with my concept, enable me to like interact with differences in a way that is continuable and extensible. And so this can help us to have a way to cope with the fragility of the presence, namely the fact that things that we perceive as well as the way we perceive can always be changeable. And it's basically all of today what I'm going to, I would want to talk about. And I know there must be a lot of things that I have limited time to expand much here. So if you guys have any questions and comments, please do say after the whole, after every presenter gives their presentation. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Kierra.
Yeah, I think it could be moved to another presenter.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Now we will give the words to Alberto. So please, Alberto, I will put you here. And your slides.
Thank you.
So it's your time.
Okay, thank you very much. So good morning, everyone. My name is Luca Alberto Rappuoli, and I'm a PhD student at the University of St. Andrews. And today I'm going to talk about what is analytic about analytic philosophy. So what is analysis? In general, the notion of analysis has played a substantial role in characterizing the so-called analytic tradition of thought. However, although it is commonly claimed that one of the hallmarks of analytic philosophers is their commitment to clarity, the very notion of analysis appears to be surrounded by an impenetrable veil of obscurity, as it were. And so different philosophers have used the term analysis to refer to a multitude of very different philosophical methodologies. So it's very natural to ask, what do they have in common? What's the relationship between these different methodologies? My talk today aims at taking a first small step to rectify this condition of methodological unawareness by sketching a general metaphilosophical characterization of the method of regressive analysis and its relation to the two additional methods of logical analysis and conceptual analysis. To this end, I shall start by presenting Russell's conception of regressive analysis. In effect, he presented a paper on regressive analysis applied to the foundations of arithmetic in 1907 at the Cambridge Mathematical Club. So I will start from there. So in general, if you think about mathematics as a discipline, chances are that you not only think of it as a deductive science, but as the deductive science. So basically, the mathematician is usually pictured as scribbling down long chains of deductive arguments that, starting from very simple premises, eventually reaches like very complex mathematical theorems, very complex conclusions. So the mathematician is imagined as progressing from simple to complex statement, from basic arithmetical statements like 1 + 1 = 2 to very complex mathematical theorems. And furthermore, given this picture of the work of the mathematician, it's very natural to think that the mathematician is willing to believe that very complex and counterintuitive mathematical theorems are true just because they're based on very basic arithmetical assertion like 1 + 1 = 2. However, this picture of mathematics, Russell suggests, is not extendable to all possible enterprises a mathematician may undertake. And in particular, if we consider the case of the foundations of arithmetic, this picture is not just inaccurate, but entirely wrong. In fact, in the study of the foundations of mathematics, basic propositions, basic arithmetical truths like 1 + 1 = 2 are taken as theorems, and then it is asked from where their truth derives. So 1 + 1 = 2 is seen as something not primitive, and then it is asked, okay, from which set of axioms we can derive the truth of 1 + 1 = 2. And in doing that, of course, the mathematician is taking for granted the truth of propositions like 1 + 1 = 2, and then he tries to abductively progress backwards to infer a possible axiomatization to then derive propositions like 1 + 1 = 2. From this, it is clear that the method employed in the study of the foundations of arithmetic is not deductive, but abductive. And so Russell says, when we infer the axioms, we can never be sure about the truth of the axioms, because in abduction, unlike deduction, the truth of the premises does not guarantee the truth of the conclusion. We can only be sure about a certain probability of the axioms. The only way to turn that probability into certainty would be to construct a proof that the axioms, the inferred explanation, is not just an explanation, but the only possible explanation. However, such a proof is only rarely available, and in its absence, what we can opt for is just to increase the probability of the axioms. There is like one method Russell suggests to increase the probability of the axioms. And that method is to carefully check the propositions entailed by the axioms, by our proposed axiomatization. And Russell suggests that we need to do that for two main reasons. The first main reason is that in checking the implication of the axiom, we can discover that the set of axioms is in fact inconsistent. It is possible to derive a contradiction from the axioms. In that case, we know for sure, Russell says, that at least one of our axioms needs to be rejected. But there's a second, more interesting case. In effect, the consequences of a given set of axioms extend, as it were, far beyond the initial basic arithmetical truths from which the axiom were derived. So let's imagine that we derive the consequences of some axioms, a set of propositions P1, Pn, and what it can happen is that one of these propositions, say P1, generates a conflict, a tension with common sense, with something that we ordinarily believe to be true. So for example, if from our axiomatization we can derive that it is not possible that, I don't know, it is not possible that there are human beings on Earth, we know that there is something wrong because we are sure that there are human beings on Earth. So in this case, in such a case, Russell suggests, we cannot know in advance in pure abstractions if it is the axioms that we need to reject or common sense. Basically, we should evaluate case by case. However, Russell says, such a conflict between the axioms and common sense is never something to be taken lightly. Okay, so to sum up, we have this picture of the axioms, and then from the axioms, supposing we succeeded in finding a suitable set of axioms, we can derive basic arithmetical propositions like 1 + 1 = 2, and then, as we said at the beginning, from this proposition, the mathematician can progress forward to obtain complex mathematical statement, complex mathematical theorems. However, there's like something curious in this picture. Russell calls this a paradox, because in effect, if you think about the axioms at the basis of arithmetic, for example, like Dedekind Peano's axioms, usually the axioms are obscure in comparison to very basic statements like 1 + 1 = 2. And that's strange, because we're saying that 1 + 1 = 2 is based on some obscure proposition. So Russell suggests we need to ask if it is the axiom that justify proposition like 1 + 1 = 2, or it's the basic arithmetical truths that justify the axiom. Of course, Russell's solution to the paradox is to draw a distinction between two different kinds of justification. So we can have logical justification and epistemic justification. And roughly, the distinction between the two is the following. Given a proposition, our reason for believing that the proposition is true is what we can call epistemic justification. And the ultimate basis for the truth of that proposition is what we can call logical justification. So in our case, if we manage to find a suitable axiomatization, we are saying that there is a logical justification going from the axioms to propositions like 1 + 1 = 2, and then logical justification going from propositions like 1 + 1 = 2 to complex mathematical theorems. Moreover, given the initial picture, we also know that the basis, the epistemic basis on which the mathematician thinks that complex theorems are true, are propositions like 1 + 1 = 2. But since, again, like the axioms are obscure in comparison to basic arithmetical statements, it is again basic arithmetical statements that epistemically justify the axioms. So what is interesting in this diagram is that in the right-hand side, logical justification, so in normal mathematics, not the foundations of arithmetic, logical justification and epistemic justification are running in the same direction, from basic arithmetical truths to complex mathematical theorems. But what is happening in the left-hand side of the diagram, on the other hand, is more peculiar, because we have logical justification and epistemic justification running in opposite direction. So the axioms logically justify basic arithmetical truths, but basic arithmetical truths are the starting point, which we need to take for granted, to start the regressive, the abductive process of finding the axioms of arithmetic. So that's the picture of regressive analysis in the foundations of arithmetic. Now, a very natural question to ask at this point is this a method for philosophy? Can we apply the method of regressive analysis to philosophy? To do that, we need something, an analog for propositions like 1 + 1 = 2. We need an epistemic starting point to initiate the process of regressive analysis, to then try to go backwards to find some axioms, some first principles. Of course, one problem with that in philosophy is that the field of research of philosophy is much broader than that of the foundations of arithmetic. But we can avoid this problem by pinning down a specific debate, a specific branch of the philosophical inquiry, and then start to extrapolate an analog for basic arithmetical truths from that specific debate. So we start by fixing on a particular philosophical debate, and then we extrapolate our epistemic starting point, the set of propositions C1, Cn, from which we can then initiate the process of regressive analysis, taking for granted the truth of this proposition, and then going backwards to some first principles, to some axioms. These propositions, given a philosophical debate, are what we can call commonsensical proposition related to that debate. So, for example, if we start from the debate in epistemology, we need to extrapolate what we ordinarily believe to be true about notions like knowledge, justification, beliefs, and so on. And we take those for granted, and then we initiate the process, the regressive search for axioms for first principles. So we can obtain for philosophy basically a diagram that is entirely similar to the one with which we described Russell's methods in the foundations of arithmetic. So according to this picture, philosophy intended as regressive analysis is the left-hand side of the diagram. However, you then may wonder, does this mean that we are founding philosophy on common sense? Does this mean that it is not possible for philosophy to revise common sense, to go against common sense? The short answer, I suggest, is yes. However, initially you might think that, given what I've said before about Russell's method, that's wrong. In fact, suppose we have managed to find a set of first principles from an initial body of commonsensical proposition of a philosophical debate, then Russell method says that we need to carefully check the implication of these first principles. And we have seen that the implications of a set of axioms extends far beyond the initial proposition C1, Cn, from which the axioms were regressively inferred. Moreover, we have also seen that one of these propositions, one of the proposition implied by the axioms, say alpha 1, can generate a conflict with common sense, some other commonsensical proposition, not the one contained in the initial set C1, Cn. And we've said that in this case, we cannot know in advance if it is alpha 1 and as a consequence the axioms that we need to reject, or common sense. So you might think, yeah, in this case, it is possible for philosophy to revise common sense. However, this appearance, I suggest, is only appearance. In fact, if we start the regressive process, taking not just a limited set of commonsensical truths, but the set containing all propositions of common sense, then it is clear that even if we try to carefully check the implication of the axioms, we cannot generate a conflict with common sense. That's because we started by taking for granted the truth of all proposition of common sense. So there can be no conflict. What can happen is that we can have a contradiction from the axioms, but even in this case, we have no choice. We cannot blame common sense because, again, we started by taking for granted the truth of these propositions. We can only blame our axiomatization, and then we need to reject the axioms, not common sense. So the upshot is that applying the method of regressive analysis to philosophy means assuming that what we ordinarily believe about reality is ultimately true. And like this position that might even seem completely trivial today has not always been unanimously embraced by the philosophical community. And in effect, this idea that what we believe about reality is ultimately true is one of the key steps in the history of analytic philosophy, in the introduction to the world of analytic philosophy. So the next question is, okay, we have this method of regressive analysis and we can start from a set of commonsensical propositions, and then we can jump backwards to some axioms from which we can then derive these initial propositions. But how exactly does this regression take place? I suggest that it is in answering this particular question that we can see that the method of regressive analysis is tightly linked to the method of logical analysis and to that of conceptual analysis. Let's start with the connection from regressive analysis to logical analysis. So we can again represent the method of regressive analysis with this diagram. So we start from common sense, we take for granted the proposition of common sense, and then we jump backwards to find a set of first principles. Supposing we've managed to do that, then we must believe that there is a logical connection between these first principles, the axioms, and the proposition of common sense from which we started. But this logical connection is difficult to verify, to establish, if we don't have a, as it were, if we don't have a precise and rigorous strategy to do so. That strategy is that of abandoning natural language in favor of an artificial language that shows the interconnections between different propositions, the logical connections between different propositions. So that method is logical analysis. So to establish the connection between the first principles and the commonsensical propositions from which we started, we need to transform both the initial propositions from which we started and the axioms in logical formulas, basically. We need to logically analyze both sets, and only then we will be able to see clearly the connection, the logical connection between the axioms and the initial propositions, and then to verify if there indeed is a logical connection between the two. So it's worth noticing that something very similar to that is exactly the train of thought that prompted Frege, the father of modern quantificational logic, to introduce his conceptual notation in 1879 in the Begriffsschrift, according to Dummett at least. So the upshot is that to complete the process of regressive analysis, we need to resort to logical analysis. Let's now move on to the connection between regressive analysis and conceptual analysis, which is the last step. So again, we can represent the method of regressive analysis with something like that diagram. So suppose again, we manage to find some first principles. Then we can ask, have we dug deep enough? Are we sure that the axioms we have, the axiomatization we found, is like the most profound one? Are we sure that we cannot jump even backwards and try to find a more profound axiomatization? In order to know this, I suggest we need to resort to conceptual analysis. And in effect, given a certain axiomatization, there are some notions, some concepts involved in the axiomatization, what we can call primitive notions, primitive concepts. But if it is possible to analyze, to conceptually analyze, so to break down, to decompose these primitive notions into more fundamental notions, then it is also possible to obtain a more fundamental axiomatization. To do that, we just need to substitute the initial notions, the primitive notions appearing in the axiomatization we initially proposed, with their decomposition. If we substitute each concept with its decomposition, then we trivially obtain a more fundamental set of axioms, because the notion appearing in this more fundamental set of axioms are the conceptual analysis of the notions appearing in the first set of axioms. So again, an eminent example of this methodology is Frege, because he, in his logicist program, he wanted to show that arithmetic, and then the whole edifice of mathematics, is reducible to pure logic. To do that, he started from Dedekind-Peano's axiomatization of arithmetic, and he needed to conceptually analyze the primitive concepts appearing in this axiomatization. So the concept of being a natural number, the concept of being the number 0, and the successor function. He needed to conceptually analyze these notions, these primitive notions in Peano's axioms, to try to jump backwards to an even more fundamental set of axioms, a set of purely logical axioms. So the final upshot is that we can also draw this link, this connection between regressive analysis and conceptual analysis. More specifically, if we want to complete a project of regressive analysis, we need to resort to conceptual analysis. So, in general, we have shown that there is this tight connection between different versions of analysis. In order to complete the process of regressive analysis in general, we first need logical analysis to establish the logical connection between the inferred axioms and the proposition of common sense from which we started, from which we initiated the regressive process. And then we need conceptual analysis to see if the process of analysis has been carried out in sufficient depth, to see if it is not possible to find a more profound and more fundamental set of axioms. And that was all for today. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Alberto. We have questions for both of you guys. So let's start with Kierra. I will put the questions here. Victor has asked to you. Analytic philosophy was initially unified in a logical positivism. Today, analytic philosophy has methodological plurality. Do you think that a meta-epistemology or skepticism can unite different methodologies?
Sorry, I think it's a question for Alberto.
Yeah, that's right. This is for Alberto. Is here. So Alberto, now you know your question. Here. Does has any relationship between philosophy of language, contingent a priori, and sensomotor enactivism? There are two questions actually. So do you want to answer this one first?
I think that this one is for the other speaker, if I'm not.
I know. Yeah, that's for me.
That's for
I know.
Kierra. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I will answer it first. Can I just split this question in two parts, because I can say
sure.
A more like confident yes to whether the relationship between whether there is a relationship between philosophy of language and enactivism.
This
but
one.
As
okay.
I don't. Yeah, shall I continue? Okay. But since I do not know much about creep, I don't know if you are referring creep by mentioning about the contingent a priori. But since I do not know much about history about this, so I will put it later and just give some tentative answer. So speaking of the relationship between philosophy of language and enactivism, I think there is a yes here. Firstly speaking, the picture of enactivism in my view is not only about to give an approach to perception. It's also to, as you can say, it's about to give a practical account of perception. In this way, it basically relates action with perception. And if we just like expand this picture more, we can also like drag things about thoughts into this picture. So I see that, in my view, the inactive picture can like give some accounts to all of thoughts, perception, as well as action. And in this case, so principally speaking, since language is something that we use to, it's have relationship between like with perception as well as thoughts. So I think in activism can do something with philosophy of language. And speaking more specifically, in the picture of an active approach to perception, when we say that, well, we can enact certain sensory motor contingencies to make certain things to be presented to us, we are actually applying that, we're actually suggesting that there are certain sensory motor contingencies which are afforded by different objects. So you see that if like I can move this mouse because and see that well, its front look like this and its bottom look like this, because this sensory motor contingencies are afforded by this mouse. But I can't like see this mouse as a television or as a laptop, because those contingencies are not afforded by this mouse. And I can't, given my own skills, I can't I can't see this mouse, see its inside, because if I do not rely on other tools or other skills, I could not open it up and see what is like of its inside. And so we can see that what sensory motor contingencies can be enacted are both determined by the qualities of an object itself, as well as what things that can be done by the perceivers, or you can also say that by the agents. In this case, when we talk about the use of language or the use of words, we can just borrow this idea that when we use different words, the words can also afford different meanings or afford different definitions. And when you use it, you're probably enacting different definitions or different meanings as well as uses of them. And I think this could probably be a way to explain what is the Wittgenstein's suggestion that when we consider the meaning of words, we should consider its use. So I think the inactive approach can give some explanations about what does that mean by the use of words or the use of language. And additionally, I think we can also take the use of language or the use of words as sort of skills. As I said, concepts can be skills in perception. When we think about things and when we perceive things with concepts, we can also use language in sense, including words, as skills when we are thinking. For example, regarding a same words, different people can have different understanding and different ability to use them. Like native speakers can have better ability to use a certain word than maybe some other people who does not have this mother tongue or things like that. So you can say that the acquaintance that a person have with a certain word can also maybe have the influence on what do they mean by the use of certain language. so I do think that there can be some work to be done between enactivism and philosophy of language, but as I say, I'm not a big like I do not know much about philosophy of language. So if I have any misunderstanding about it, please just tell me. And regarding the part of the contingent a priori, I can't give even a tentative answer now, because I really do not see like any concrete relation between them. However, like I can give you some background knowledge about enactivism or enactive approach. Say, actually in the enactivism, especially the Avernois version of it, is sort of can be squared in the tradition of Kant's philosophy. So it's about to explain how do we perceive the unity of an object. At the same time, we do not really have to see the unity, namely the every part of it. And in Avernois' view, he is like giving some accounts of this conscient suggestion. And I hope this might have something to do with Kripke's works about Kant or other stuff. And this is basically my answer to this question.
Thank you, Kierra. So now I will put Alberto here. So I have read already the question. It was my confusion, I'm sorry.
So is that the one about philosophy and logical positivism?
Yes.
Okay, so just to repeat, the question is, analytic philosophy was initially unified in logical positivism, but today analytic philosophy has different methodological strategies, has methodological plurality. Yes, I tend to disagree on the initial part about like the analytic philosophy being initially unified in logical positivism, because I follow Dummett in taking 1879 as the initial year, as the birth of analytic philosophy, with the publication of Frege's Begriffsschrift, and then the second birthplace of analytic philosophy just some years later, I think is like Cambridge, with early Russell and Moore. And logical positivism was then like a later development of early analytic philosophy, partially based on Wittgenstein's Tractatus. And yeah, I agree, but I agree that like in terms of philosophical methodology, the Vienna Circle and logical positivists were pretty clear, and there is, on the contrary, a certain degree of unclarity in Frege, Russell, and Moore. So yeah, and as for the methodological plurality of contemporary analytic philosophy, I think that basically my research is, at least in part, motivated by the emergence of new approaches to philosophical methodology. So, for example, conceptual engineering in St. Andrews is now a big thing. There are a lot of people talking about conceptual engineering. So they say, don't analyze concept. We want to do engineering with concept. We want to revise our concept, not simply to describe them. But like, and even like with experimental philosophy, for example, is another emergent approach to philosophical inquiry. However, all these approaches present themselves as being contrary to analysis. But it seems to me that if we don't start by having a clear conception of what the method of analysis is, this whole debate for the introduction of new and different methodologies is just spurious in a sense, because we are saying that we want to destroy analysis, but we don't even know what analysis is. And in a sense, my research is trying to find like the interconnections between these different versions of analysis in the history of analytic philosophy, but also in contemporary philosophy, those that survive in contemporary philosophy. So the regressive style of analysis, what I was describing today, which is just one kind of analysis, survives, for example, in mereology, like the study of the notion of parthood is basically an axiomatic study of that notion intended as regressive analysis. We start from our intuitions, what we ordinarily believe to be true about what is part of what, the notion of parthood, and then we try to regressively infer a certain axiomatization, certain general principles from which we can then derive truth about parthoods and so on. Or even like in contemporary analytic metaphysics, there's a lot of debate about what's the right logic for metaphysics. According to some, it's S5. According to some others, different logics. But those debates are just an application of the method of regressive analysis. You start by taking for granted that you believe something about possibility and necessity, and you try to go backwards, inferring what's the right axiomatization to capture these ideas, these intuitive ideas. So it is in that sense that my project is connected to contemporary analytic philosophy, but it is definitely true, as you're suggesting, that we have a lot of different methodologies in contemporary analytic philosophy. Thank you very much for the question, of course.
Thank you for your answer, Alberto. So we have one more for you. This one. It's hard to see how the method could work for ethics, politics, which require historical and cultural context. Can you comment something on analytical methods for ethics, politics?
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. I think that it's completely right. And even like in the mind of the founding fathers of analytic philosophy, so Frege, Russell, Wittgenstein, the problems about ethics and politics were not the first concern at the beginning. Like the main objective was more towards the philosophy of mathematics, the philosophy of logic, and the introduction of logic itself. So you're completely right in saying that it is not obvious how this method can be applied to ethics or politics and so on and so forth. I mean, I would say that for sure it can be applied to ethics and moral philosophy and so on. The problem is that then you will get a very a particularly arid result, if we want to put it this way. And the general problem with the application of the method of regressive analysis to politics and ethics is basically that, as I said in the talk, basically for regressive analysis to start, to even like start thinking about regressive analysis, you need to designate, to isolate an initial set of commonsensical propositions. And then you need to take for granted the truth of these propositions. But it seems very difficult in ethics, in politics, to parcel out an isolated set of propositions on which we all agree and that we can take for granted to be true. That's very start to begin with. It is very clear that we can do that in the foundations of arithmetic, because we all agree that 1 + 1 = 2. But it's not the same when you start talking about ethics and politics. It's like, by definition, very difficult to find a specific proposition on which everybody agrees in ethics. I mean, it's even like if you go to a different country, then maybe they have like different moral codes, different moral rules. And yeah, but so that was the part of my answer about regressive analysis. Still, I think that conceptual analysis and logical analysis are very important, even in politics and in ethics. So for conceptual analysis, it's basically trivial, like even in the ancient Greeks, asking question like what is right, what is wrong, and then try to use your intuition, mental experiments to find an answer, to find, if you want, a set of necessary and sufficient conditions for something to be right, was something very important in the philosophical practice. But even like the translation of ethical and political notions into logical formulas can be helpful, just because you can clarify that way, you can clarify the implications of your thinking, of your theories, and to see what they logically imply, to see if they're consistent, to see if there is like some tensions with common sense, with other branches of common sense. So I think even if the method of regressive analysis is not directly applicable to ethics and politics, we can still make good use of both logical analysis and conceptual analysis in that branches of the debate.
Thank you so much for your answer, Alberto. I will put Kierra here also. And I want to thank you guys for being here with us and present your works here with us. And is anything else you guys want to say or
if we
share
have
with
time,
us? Yes.
If we have time,
we do.
I have a question for Kierra, actually. So, can I just go ahead?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, like one thing that, I mean, during your presentation, I was thinking, okay, what about like, it was very interesting, and I was thinking about the connection between like the framework you're presenting and skepticism about perception, like very old-fashioned philosophical skepticism about perception. So the idea that we cannot access the world directly. It seems that what you're saying is like directly realistic, as you were saying. So it seems like the position is something like, okay, we can access directly the world. So I was wondering if that way, in that framework, we simply have like no skeptical problem, or if there is like a version of skepticism in that, or they have like a particular answer to the skeptic. That was just
yes, the idea of inactive approach is to deny that we do not have the direct contact with the world, because I think the motivation to propose this proposal is about to like clean some thoughts that can be tempted to lead us to the skepticism out of the picture. For example, the inactive approach is against a very old version of representationalism. For example, we have some mental representation of the world. So, according to that view, well, what you perceive probably be your mental representation. So it's a mental image, not really the world. What you perceive is only about the world, but it's not really the world. And so when we like propose the inactive approach, we basically, firstly, we want to clear up this kind of thoughts. And so whether if it could still be challenged by the skepticism of perception, I think we can analyze this by two parts. Firstly, whether we could have hallucination or illusion, or like things like real hallucination. I think in the inactive approach, we can deny that there will be real hallucination, because there it won't be a viable question to ask whether there will be real hallucination. It will be part of things that we can be encountered when we perceive, namely we have the predicament. Say, as I say, we have the fragile. The presence we have will be fragile. So you can, at some points, it could be distorted. What you see or what you hear about could be distorted. But to say that our perception is an inactive is exactly to say that, well, even though you can be encountered by this kind of difficulties, you can still like cope with it or improve it or like correct it by continue your perceptual activity. So I think that this kind of illusion or hallucination would be something that accompanies our perceptual experiences. Secondly, if we consider about more profound worries about the skepticism of perception, I think that it would lead us to another question, that whether there would be any epistemic ambition or epistemic accounts that will be provided by an active approach. I think that's in active approach, the epistemic goal or in the epistemic ambition would be quite tentative. It will be that, say, in certain environment, given certain conditions, for example, given certain qualities of objects and certain skills or abilities that we have as perceivers or agents, we can achieve certain degrees of like epistemic goal, but there would always be much more for us to explore. So it would just be tentative goals, and it can't be any perfect answer to give about epistemic things by an active approach. And say, so yeah, thank you for your question, and I hope this would help.
Yeah, no, it was very clear. Thank you.
And can I also raise a question to Al?
Sure, I'll ask you right now.
Yeah, it's just a small point, and it might be quite naive. So when you finish your part about regressive analysis, you mentioned that we should have an epistemic start point, and I just want to know whether, I can't perfectly understand your arguments, but I still just I have the question that why it's an epistemic start point rather than any other sort of start points, and especially when we consider some question like Yasmin had just asked about political things and moral things. If this could be any moral starting point or ethical starter point like that.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That is actually helping me to clarify what I was saying. So roughly, I was using the word or the term epistemic starting point just because I was following Russell's usage of that word, because I said that it draws a distinction between epistemic justification and logical justification. So I was just following his terminology there. So there is nothing more profound about the word epistemic. So it is epistemic in the sense that, so we have this in normal mathematics, not the foundations of arithmetic. We can infer very complex mathematical theorems from basic arithmetical truths like 1 + 1 = 2. And in that case, logical justification and epistemic justification, I said, are running in the same direction, because we can derive logically the very complex mathematical theorems from the basic arithmetical truths. So logical justification is going forward. And also the epistemic justification is going forward because, according to Russell's terminology, the reason the mathematician has to believe that a very complex and counterintuitive mathematical statement is true is precisely that that statement is based on something he takes for granted, something like very an evident trivial truth, like 1 + 1 = 2. That's the reason. And the direction of these two justifications in the foundations of arithmetic is actually reversed. So from the logical justification goes from the axiom to basic arithmetical truths, but the epistemic justification goes from 1 + 1 = 2 basic arithmetical truths back to the axioms. And that's because Russell says, like, the axioms can be very obscure. Like, if you think about some proposed axioms for arithmetic, they're not intuitive. I mean, you read it and it's a very long, very complex mathematical formula, and you're like, no, that's not intuitive. I mean, 1 + 1 is clearly more intuitively true than that, right? That's Russell's reasoning. So what he's saying is that we believe that the axioms are true just because from the axioms we can then derive 1 + 1 = 2, and we know that 1 + 1 = 2 is true. So that's the only reason why we believe that the axioms are true, because we can go backwards from 1 + 1 = 2 to the axioms, right? So he's talking about epistemic justification in the sense that, I mean, maybe epistemic justification is like a bit counterintuitive as a term. Maybe it should just talk about starting point, not even epistemic, starting point for the regressive method. So he's taking 1 + 1 = 2 as a starting point to then go backwards. That's all I wanted to mean with the word epistemic, because it's your reason for believing that the axioms are true. That's why I guess it's called epistemic. And for the political part, ethics, politics part of that, yeah, I think you're completely right in terms of the applicability of that methodology to politics and moral philosophy in general. Again, I think that the problem is that you cannot find, so in that case, by epistemic starting point, I would mean, again, just a set of propositions on which we all agree, so that we can take the truth of that for granted to then try to go backwards to the axioms. And in my opinion, it is very difficult in moral philosophy and in ethics to pin down a precise set of propositions on which we all agree. Because again, that is gonna, I mean, for mathematics, it's pretty trivial to say that we all agree that 1 + 1 = 2. I mean, we can have some objections, but apart from that, it's certain, I mean, in comparison with politics and ethics, we can for sure see that there is a stronger basis, a stronger epistemic basis for mathematics in that sense, in the sense of what we need for regressive analysis. Because in ethics, it's very difficult from the beginning to pin down this set of commonsensical truths, because we disagree a lot on on that. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Good. Any more questions? No, so we can finish now. I want to thank you once again. You both. Are you both from St. Andrews University?
Yes, I think so.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think so.
So nice. So thank you again. It's a pleasure to have you both here with us. I will finish now in Portuguese, ok? Então, eu quero agradecer a presença de todos aqui, por terem acompanhado a gente, agradecer de novo o canal Agenciamentos Contemporâneos, por estar colocando a gente aqui online no canal deles. Está sendo muito importante para a gente fazer esse evento com vocês e poder transmitir ao vivo. Lembrar vocês que a gente tem mais mesas à tarde, a gente tem mais mesas amanhã, e na quinta-feira a gente finaliza com as mesas presenciais lá na Unifesp, com convidados especiais, então acompanhe a nossa programação. E é isso, até a próxima. Bye!